Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our September 15th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler. This week features a couple of your peers from different parts of the state, Page County farmer Justin Dammann and Grundy County farmer Fred Abels, who was recently named Iowa's 2025 Conservation Farmer of the Year. We'll start with Justin Dammann, who raises cattle, corn, and soybeans, and also sells grain bagging systems to farmers with logistical challenges and/or extra corn and soybeans to store. We know quite a few farmers might find themselves in that boat this fall, so we wanted to explore the grain bagging system that Justin and other farmers like him are using. For more on that, here's spokesman reporter Bob Bion with Justin Dammann.
Justin, welcome. Hey, thanks for being with us today. Maybe you could share a little bit about your family farm history and your own journey in agriculture?
Yeah, so grew up here in the southwest corner, Page County. My family's farmed here for a long, long time. Our oldest century farm here is 1901, so sixth generation here. And my wife, Jennifer, and I, two kids, Jaden and Jillian, and Jaden loves the farm, and Jillian's very driven into going into the nursing program, so we're thankful for our kids. And yeah, over time, we just kept growing the farm to the point where we kind of struggled with harvest and bought a grain bagger in 2009 and did that for quite a while. And then, we always look at, do we have an edge? And if we do as an individual or as a company, what is our edge and what are we good at and what do we enjoy? And all those things fit this journey of grain bagging, and not just on our own farm, but eventually, as we talk here today, it turned into selling machines and plastic all over North America. So we've just really enjoyed that. And that's kind of where we are here today, farming and selling machines and other equipment as well, but specifically plastic and flexible grain storage.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about grain bagging in particular. And back to 2009, what made you decide to give it a try?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. This machine system has been going on and was perfected in South America and Argentina over 30 years ago. And so what Richiger, the company we started with, perfected primarily was the grain bag unloader. There had been lots of baggers in the silage world and even a grain bagger, I believe, in the United States that just needed some tweaking to really work. They perfected the unloader back then. So it wasn't that in 2009 it was necessarily new. It had been going on for a long time in South America, but those baggers didn't really come to the States until 2000 and I believe 3 or 4 was the first grain baggers. And so when we tried it, even in 2009, it was pretty new. People looked at you pretty funny when you're putting grain in a giant garbage bag on the side of the field. It looked different. But the reason we did it was same rules today. We just were out of storage. We didn't have enough help, didn't have enough trucks. The combines kept getting bigger. And with the harvest the way it goes anymore with more bushels, even if you're farming the same amount of acres, we're all handling more bushels, right? Because the yields keep getting larger. And so that was our main reason, is just we were out of storage and didn't have enough physical storage. And we farmed about 60 miles east to west spread out. We were getting to where we were farming 30 miles from home, and trucking grain that far to a local facility around the family farm was just not practical.
Well, you've called that first bagger purchase a game changer for your operation. Can you share a specific moment when you realized, yeah, this was the right move?
The aha moment was when the stress became much, much less, which then became more enjoyable to harvest. I used to really not look forward to harvest because of the logistical nightmare that we would have to go through to combine over 1 million bushels of grain and try to find a home, whether it was our bins, contracts in town, elevator hours. And when you and your son can go out, dad in the combine, son in the grain cart, whatever that situation is, and not have to worry about all that logistical challenge and just combine and haul corn to the bagger, and we worry about hauling it away later, that's when it becomes fun. And we have not built a bin in over a decade, and I don't plan to. Now, we're blessed here. Our corn dries down pretty well. We get enough heat in the fall. And I get it. If you've got a dry corn, you may need a bin setup. But other than that, logistically, it's just a real blessing. And that was one of our aha moments. But the biggest thing for me is just reducing that stress level so that we can enjoy harvest.
Well, for someone who's never seen it and the process, can you walk us through exactly how grain bagging works from start to finish?
You bet. From the very start, if you rent or buy your own machine, once you got the machine, basically the only thing you need to buy annually is a grain bag, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. And so once you put that bag on the machine, for most of the machines that we sell, you dump it in the top. It's just got a big hopper on it. The corn goes in the machine. The machine packs it into that plastic and then is in neutral and just moves forward as you dump that grain into that machine. And there are brakes on the machine then that you hold the tractor back essentially, and then it packs the grain to the recommended stretch of the plastic. And then once you're at the end of the bag, you basically just seal it up. So there's lots of different ways you can seal it, but you can truly seal these bags to where it's an anaerobic environment. That's another key thing about bagging is it's a zero shrink procedure, to where mechanical moving grain around, running fans, all those things, a lot of guys can prove 2, maybe 3% shrink. And where it's a zero shrink factor in plastic, that's a big number too when you're handling a lot of bushels and maybe wanting to store the moisture that is in that grain and not shrink it. So you fill it that way, and then we have an unloader so that when you're ready to sell the grain or feed the grain, you hook another machine to the plastic, and it essentially rolls the plastic up as you dump the grain into the semi or the grain cart, whatever you're using to clean that bag. And all this is happening very quickly. So the bagger has a 24-inch auger. We have machines up to 50,000 bushels an hour that they rate them at. So it's really fast. As far as loading trucks, you can do that in as little as 4 minutes. We have one machine that's rated at 250 bushel a minute. So again, very quick procedure.
Well, let's talk about this harvest season where they're talking big yields, bin busting yields, grain bagging, gaining some more interest. So what in particular this year do you think makes this harvest season and the conditions we're going to see especially well suited for grain bagging?
We saw this last year in certain regions of the United States, and I point to Marshall, Missouri this year. Marshall had a record-breaking bin buster crop. They had every situation you could throw at that region happen. They had 25 to 50 bushel an acre bigger corn crops than they thought they had. The heat hit pretty quick in the fall, so it let farmers harvest very quickly. And so the farmers down there slammed that corn into town and elevators very quickly. And then the trains didn't come. They couldn't get it hauled back out. We hauled just load after load of machines down in that area to help those guys out. And I remember the state of mind those farmers were in, and it's very similar to today. And that is, as a grower, you got this monster crop, and you start to think that, boy, what I'm growing is just not going to be worth anything. It's never going to go up again. We got too much of it. And those farmers were feeling that same thing last year. But those farmers today are coming back and buying plastic this year, saying, Justin, we remember when corn hit $3.40 a bushel at harvest, and we didn't know what to do. But after harvest, shortly thereafter, and it'll happen again this year, we don't know when, but it will happen, basis improved. They got trains in. Now, all of a sudden, their hunger for corn increased. So what happened? The price increased. The board came with us. It went up all the way through February. And a lot of those guys that thought there was never going to be any hope picked up 80, 90 cents, maybe $1 a bushel on that corn at a time when they thought it was never going to go up again. And so That's the reason we're going to do it again this year. And that's why we have record calls of new machines, more plastic, bigger crop, because corn will not stay at $3.50 forever. I don't know when the market's going to move. Nobody does, but we know that corn's not going to stay at $3.50 forever. If that happened, nobody would plant it next year, or there would be a lot less acres. So it will move higher. We just have to find a good economic source for storage. And we have that. It's very economical. This plastic is 6 to 7 cents a bushel. These machines really, in today's world of all the dollars that farmers handle, these machines are very economical. They're the only thing you can buy that is, once you buy one, you're literally never out of storage. You can put 100,000 bushels of storage in the back of a pickup truck. It's that condensed. And so it's just very flexible. And those are the reasons they're calling today. The other big reason is this is a year where it's the perfect storm. We have full carry in the market between now and July. So it's going to pay us to store this thing. We have terrible basis because the chain is still full. But the blessing is we have record exports every week. And everybody out there that wants to steal this grain, all they want to do is talk about how big the crop is. But we all know that that's only one part of the equation. The other side of the equation is the cure for low prices is low prices. And $3.50 corn is moving this crop out of this country at a record pace. And so that's why we need to store this grain. We as farmers, most of us can't grow a bushel of corn for $3.50. Most of our break-evens in Iowa are somewhere between $4 and $4.50 a bushel, depending on the operation. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. Even here in Southwest Iowa today, I see, local cash grains around $3.50, but I can pick up the phone and sell corn for $4.25 if I'm willing to hold it for a few months. So at $4.25, maybe that's the number that a person can show a small profit and kind of work through this tough year.
How about managing challenges? Like, how do these grain bags hold up in extreme weather? Or, we are always talking about animals getting into them. How do we manage that?
No, great question. So there's been a lot of products come to this market because it's a growing market. So when we first started, we did all kinds of things to, say, reduce rodent holes in the bottom of the bag. We would put ammonia to essentially create an ammonium barrier so that the rodents wouldn't feed on the plastic. But now we have, rodent repellent plastic. We have sprays that you can spray around the bag. Even in extreme situations where we have a lot of deer around them, you can even set just a single hot wire fence around them. But the deer generally don't bother them. Only in the event where it gets really cold or a lot of snow and a lot of deer pressure, we have had to do that. But there are definitely ways around all of this. And, a lot of guys that'll call and say, well, I saw one of these mishaps, whether it was a split bag or, maybe holes in a bag. All that stuff can happen if you leave it out there long enough. But the reality is, as I always tell guys, it doesn't matter if it's grain bins or grain bags. We've had grain spoil in grain bins. We've had bins break open. Those things are going to happen on either side of whatever storage it is, but all those things are manageable. That's been our goal, is to minimize those. You're never going to completely eradicate all that, but if you set your bagger right, you set your rope right, you set the brakes right, and you use the right unloader in the right manner, you shouldn't have those things happen. For example, we've all probably had a little corn go out of condition in a grain bin over the years at some point, but we all still use the grain bins, and that's just part of it. But yes, very manageable. We have some guys, even in South Georgia, that are bagging grain where the wild hogs are a real nuisance. And I always tell guys, if they can bag grain where those wild hogs are, we can certainly do it in Iowa because they are a real challenge.
Would you mind sharing a real world example, like a customer story, where grain bagging significantly boosted that farmer's bottom line? I think you and I have talked in the past about maybe somebody in Missouri and chickens.
There's so many, but one of them in Missouri, there's a real poultry premium in South Missouri, Arkansas, that those guys need corn later in the season. And so At their local elevator, the price obviously was not very attractive during harvest. It never is, it seems like. But once they were able to store their own grain, they could then sell that at a very large premium, which they would never get during harvest. But since they were able to store their own grain and essentially capture better carry and a huge basis improvement to go into the poultry facility, they picked up $1.50 a bushel. Now, that's on price, and we have tons of those stories where guys, added real value. But some of the neatest ones for me is just like a quality of life story. I had a farmer, father-son operation that called me and said, I just want to thank you for helping us get started, because he said, we want to enjoy harvest. And he said, my son, when he gets out of school, it's 4 or 5 o'clock a lot of times. And then, the elevator closes a couple hours after that and we don't get much harvesting in. But since we bought the bagger, we can harvest till 10 o'clock at night and do that on our own schedule, on our own time, and know that we're not confined to those things. And we can just be out there, him and I, enjoying the harvest, not worrying about having to manage trucks or any of that logistical challenge, and him and I just be out there harvesting grain in the fall. And I thought that's really neat, because that's how I want to do harvest. I want to enjoy the harvest. It's one of the most favorite times of the year, bringing in especially a big corn crop. And it's nice to be able to get rid of that stress so you can enjoy that harvest.
Yeah, so for a farmer possibly weighing this investment, what's the typical return on investment for grain bagging equipment, and how quickly can it pay for itself?
We're pretty excited about where this plastic has gone. When I started bagging, plastic was a little over 10 cents a bushel, and there's been a lot more players come into that world. So now we've been able to get that plastic cost down almost half. This year on a pre-order, best case scenario, high fives, 6 cents a bushel. And so that logistically is really moving in the right direction. As far as buying a complete system and paying that off, obviously that makes a big difference on how many bushels you're going to put through that machine. But in a typical scenario, I have guys time after time say, we paid for that system the first year. And that happens all the time. You can buy a bagger still today for about $40,000. So let's say you bag 100,000 bushels of grain and you add even 80 cents a bushel to it, which was, I would say, was a good average last year. So that's an $80,000 plus to 100,000 bushel on account. And essentially you would pay for the bagger and most of your unloader. Unloaders are a little more expensive. They're about $49,000 today. But essentially in 1 year, you would nearly have both machines paid for and have them to use at no expense going forward on a 100,000 bushel example. The plastic each year, we always tell guys 6 cents a bushel sounds like maybe a lot, but guys won't even load a truck anymore and haul it 2 miles for less than 10 cents a bushel. So the freight logistics savings alone will more than pay for your plastic each year.
This year, especially with our harvest bin busters that we're all expecting, I think many are going to maybe look at this system a little bit more this year and even going forward. So what advice would you give to somebody maybe looking at this and, I'm going to give this a try for the first time?
I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk to farmers all over the United States, from the far south tip of South Padre, Texas, all the way to the Canadian border and a little bit into Canada. It just is really interesting, and this intrigues me this year, is how many farmers have got a bumper crop and are really kind of down on this year. And it's because of the price. It's because the cost of production is exceeding their break evens, even though from the road, it's the most beautiful corn crop I've ever seen in Iowa. And that bothers me. But what I will tell guys is that's why I'm so passionate about selling these systems, is it is a true solution to that problem. I mean, we have 0% financing options that we have on a certain line of baggers. Even if a guy doesn't want to spend the money today, you can buy a machine, add value to your crop, or we rent tons of machines. So don't feel like if you're out there and you're only going to maybe need storage for 10 or 20 or 30,000 bushels, our rental program is great for that. So we have options for any size grower. from one bag to guys that bag over 1 million bushels a year. So I would challenge anybody out there that has a harvest challenge, storage problem, to give it a shot this year. Even if you called us up and said, I've heard about these, but I'd like to just rent it and try it for one bag. It would be a huge success and you would not be disappointed. Give it a try. Don't let these prices get you down because we're blessed with a big crop. And let's figure out a way to add value, capture that carry, get through harvest here and pick up this extra premium that we can certainly take advantage of after harvest here.
Thanks, Justin. I'm sure we have plenty of listeners out there who can relate to the logistical challenges Justin just laid out for us. If you'd like to look further into the grain bagging system Justin mentioned, we've included a link to his website down in the notes for this podcast episode. Next up is the 2025 Iowa Conservation Farmer of the Year, Fred Abels, a Farm Bureau member from Grundy County. Earlier this month, I had a chance to visit Fred's farm and sit down with him to discuss his decades-long commitment to conservation. Fred, thank you so much for having me out to your farm here in Grundy County today. Tell us, I guess, first of all, a little bit about your farm where we're sitting here today.
Well, I farm here in Grundy County, and we raise corn and soybeans. I started no-tilling corn and soybeans in 1994. Added strip till, I think, in about 2004. And cover crops, I started playing around with them in 2009. My first few years, I just never felt I was very successful at it. Finally, we bought our own drill. 2015, we went whole hog. We did the whole farm. It was 6 years of learning, and finally, I feel successful at it now.
Well, it sounds like a lot of trial and error, like most farmers.
Yeah.
You experiment with a new thought or a concept, see how it works, and sometimes it takes, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Mostly, I want to say it was application in the fall. Once we bought our own drill, that made a difference, too, because before then, we were having it flown on, and that was kind of a hit or miss. And some guys are successful, and I didn't feel like I was, so...
And you're talking cover crops,
Yeah,
correct?
cover crops.
Sure. You mentioned kind of some lessons learned, some trial and error, taking on some challenges, seeing if it works. Sometimes it doesn't. What about field days and networking through those? Is that something that you participate in?
You can ask my wife. I've gone to lots of field days. We hosted a field day here the end of June that showcase the wetland and the saturated buffer we put in. I've hosted field days on cover crops, on strip till. We farmed an acreage in Holland right down the road from the city park. So that was like in June. We had a field day there. The corn wasn't very tall, so everybody could really see what I was doing or not doing. Because I've never had a strip till bar that was store-bought. Everything has been something I built. And even now, what I'm using, I put together myself. So
That's impressive. Now, you mentioned the restored wetland that's right next to your farm here,
Yeah.
effective at denitrification and improving water quality. Tell us about your experience with that, any of the results that you've seen or some noticeable impacts.
I serve on the Grundy County SWCD board. And boy, I wish I could tell you, maybe it was 10 years ago when the Middle Cedar WMA Water Management Authority, they were just getting started. We met once every 3 months, and they'd bring speakers in about water management. I mean, either farmers or the cities, the end results, what they were looking for and stuff. And I'm glad I served on that.
I bet that was a valuable experience,
Yes,
and the public-private partnership between farmers and landowners and cities, municipalities, I'm sure that's important in your area as well.
I can't stress to you how much Cedar Rapids is willing to work with farmers. That is a undescribable partnership. That saturated buffer, Cedar Rapids put it in. All I had to say was yes, and NRCS to find a suitable spot. They did all the legwork at designing it and where it went and stuff.
Wow. So the city of Cedar Rapids identified that as being a strategic area to restore that wetland. And
and I'm an hour and 15 minutes from Cedar Rapids. It's easier to treat the watershed if you start at the top end than closer to the lower end, because just the amount of volume of water.
well, with weather volatility that you've seen this year, it is hard to measure, at a moment in time. And tell us a little bit about that. How has the evolving and changing and volatile weather impacted your conservation efforts?
It's really been increased flows of water. Fortunately, here, we really only had one storm. I think we got 3+ inches, and then the water overtopped the embankment. There's 2 big rocks out there. The one's as big as your kitchen table.
Oh, wow.
And the other one is about 2 foot shorter. And the morning of that 3-inch rain, only the top of the shorter one was visible by that much. But you're seeing it now with all the grass slowly getting established. Back then, it was still just dirt.
Well, it'll be exciting to wait and see what sort of results that yields, what sort of insight you have, and I'm sure you'll be able to share that with other folks. Now, when it comes to technology and innovation, in your farming career, how has that helped you be able to do more and take on this water quality challenge?
Let's see, 2 years ago I bought GPS RTK that helped me with the cover crops, because in corn, our air seeder, we seed twin row rye, and in the 20-inch gap between the twin rows is where we plant our corn. The corn doesn't have the shading effect going for it when you've got that 20-inch break, so the cereal rye isn't seeding it. In the spring, with the strip till bar, that's helped me. Instead of running markers, I just click on the GPS, and that way I'm able to follow the planter right in the strip till bar's tracks. I mean, that's how technology's changed it for me.
Yeah, made a big impact. And for farmers who've been farming a longer amount of time, there's probably just so many advancements that they can look back on. For young people or folks just getting into agriculture, what might you say to them? What advice would you give for farming in general, but specifically in conservation as they look to try to do more?
Well, like I told you earlier, my strip till bar is homemade. My nitrogen applicator's homemade. My planter, we went through it 2 years ago replacing parts. It's not a high dollar planter by any means, but it's not new.
So it doesn't have to be expensive. You don't need to completely re-outfit everything. You can repurpose like what you've done. What about cost share programs or other opportunities for farmers if they're looking to get involved might be available to them, or what resources might you suggest?
Equip is one of them. I'm in the Blackhawk Creek watershed, so that's another help with planting the cover crops. Equip has got, I think you can use strip till, get paid for strip till, and also for no-till planting. I've done it so long that I didn't qualify. So.
Yeah, and there's so many programs out there, it is hard to keep track, so we try to help members out and let them know where they can look for different resources. But it sounds like getting involved with your local watershed's a great place to start.
Yes, it is.
And with the networking that's available, you might be connected with somebody who can point you in the right direction or provide some insight.
Our local SWCD, for first-time people that are trying everything for the first time, there's increased funds available for that stuff. If you're afraid of failing, do it on the back 40 where nobody can see it.
Exactly. And I think all good success stories have a little bit of failure mixed in there too. You just kind of have to try out. It sounds like obviously there's a lot going on in conservation, a great story to tell from the standpoint of Iowa agriculture. What makes you optimistic that we're making progress, that we're on the right track?
It seems like every year there's new acres of cover crops added, and that helps. If they feel successful with cover crops, they should try no-till planting and strip till also. All those three work together.
Yeah, we've got some great numbers there on ramping up cover crop acreage and conservation tillage across the state. Now, for folks that might think that progress isn't happening or it's not happening quick enough, what would you tell to those folks to assure them and let them know that farmers are taking on the challenge?
More farmers got to tell the story like I am today. Social media, put it on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter. I don't post near the same amount of stuff on Twitter as I do Facebook, but use social media. Work with your local NRCS SWCD. We've hosted a lot of field days out here, and 5 years ago we had one, and my wife, she said, that's enough. So then I switched to doing it at the Grundy County Fair, and that went over good. We held a field day, and we were pulling speakers in, talking cover crops or nutrients, way to put nutrients on without disturbing so much soil. And I mean, we've had a host of different subjects. One year, the 3 speakers all started their own cover crop seed business, selling it.
Oh, wow.
And they came and talked, and we try and do it 3 hours. I want to say the first 3 years, we had 50 or 60 people show up when it started and stayed there, and then we'd feed them a lunch. I know one of the field days we had out here, the one speaker, he didn't get away from here for another hour, and I know some of the ones in town at the fair kept our speakers late.
Wow. So, I think that shows the appetite of local farmers wanting to hear about conservation and what they can do. I think that's a great story to tell, and you mentioned sharing that story, farmers encouraging them. Conservation, so much of it is visual. Of course, we have the data to show progress, but that visual element, you talked about the visual cues that you're seeing on progress at your wetland, the restoration of habitat, wildlife coming back, so many of those visual things, and consumers might not know what that snaking waterway is through a farm field, or why post-harvest is there a crop growing out there not knowing that they're cover crops. So sounds like there's a lot of visual storytelling to be done.
Yeah, we've got waterways on all our land except for really this one at home here. So we've established waterways through cost share, through the SWCD and state funding, and we've used EQIP. Some of them are CRP waterways, so they're funded. We've had to chip in, but I used to get the High Plains Journal, and one month they had a farmer on the front, and he said that there's money out there. If you want to try this new practice, hunt down the money and help them fund it. So I took that to heart.
Thanks for your hospitality, Fred, and congratulations on being named Iowa's 2025 Conservation Farmer of the Year. It's so important to shed light on farmers like Fred, who are growing conservation efforts on their farms without a lot of fanfare. That's why Iowa Farm Bureau has ConservationCountsIowa.com, a website dedicated to showcasing farmers' local conservation efforts and statewide progress. Whether you're looking for conservation stories from your region of the state, a rundown of upcoming conservation field days for farmers, or a list of the conservation practices Iowa leads the nation in, you can find it all at ConservationCountsIowa.com. And if you're looking for other resources to help you continue growing your conservation work, visit cleanwateriowa.org or stop by your local USDA Service Center for more information. That's all for this edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you have a safe and productive start to the 2025 harvest season, and that you'll join us for our next podcast episode on September 29th. And while you're waiting for that next episode, be sure to catch up on any past episodes that you may have missed. Some of our recent podcast episodes have included fascinating conversations on the impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill, the state of Iowa's water quality, an analysis of the meat consumption in the United States, just to name a few. You can find all of those past episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast or in your favorite podcast app. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.